This week on the show, Luminosity win DreamHack Austin, ESL Pro League is live right now, and Tyloo wins the Asia Minor. I'm Jack Westerman, joined by Corey Megaman Gilbert, and you're watching PopFlash. This week's clip is WinFact versus Fnatic at IEM 6 2012, where Alu picks up a 4K in the first group stage game. Unfortunately, WinFact would lose 12-16 to Fnatic and fail to advance from Group B. They took home $2,000. Our first story this week is DreamHack Open Austin, which took place between May 6th and 8th in Austin, Texas, as you might expect. There were $100,000 up for grabs and 8 teams in attendance, all from the Americas, so 6 North American teams and, of course, Luminosity and Tempo Storm thrown in from Brazil. So, Megaman, as we take a look at Group A, this was the group with Luminosity, Splice, Cantorlogic, and Cloud9. And I think it's fair to say, as we look at the graphic here, Luminosity made pretty light work of this.
Yeah, Luminosity didn't really have too many problems going through this. I mean, they lost a combined total of 8 rounds through the groups. Pretty standard stuff for them, all things considered. Especially, you know, after winning the major, they did relatively well at Malmö. And actually going into this tournament and throughout this tournament, they actually had a pretty hot streak going on. I believe that they were in online plus offline matches. Their last 30 matches, they were like 28 out of 30 that they had won. They had like a 15-game winning streak throughout this tournament. So pretty impressive stuff from Luminosity, to say the least.
Yeah, another team that looked pretty good, I think, while we're on this group here. So Cloud9 obviously got off to a great start, beat Cantorlogic Gaming 16-1, lost to Luminosity in that upper final game, but then closed out against CLG over on the far right, 2-1. It marks a little upturn for Cloud9, I think it's fair to say, because they were looking kind of rough earlier this year, and this is a nice turnaround. Is it fair to say these guys are playing with a bit more conviction on Cloud9?
Yes and no. I think that the biggest point for Cloud9 is the fact that they had a lot of individual big plays throughout this tournament. One thing to note was Stewie2K actually did very, very well in this tournament, especially in this series through groups. Did really pretty good. They had the debut of Slimmy, who's their new in-game leader as well, who I think actually kind of surprised a lot of people with just necessarily his raw fragging ability. They didn't really bring too much tactically to the table throughout this tournament. You can look at that from the CT side round wins to their terrorist side round wins. They had a lot more on CT side, which is where they're going to feel a little bit more comfortable. But again, I mean, Slimmy's just getting acclimated into this roster. It's definitely with the experience and the veteranship of Nothing and Skadoodle to be able to try to guide him and mold him into this in-game leader that they need to have is definitely going to bode well for him in the future. Another key point to actually bring up through this tournament specifically was the resurgence of Nothing. He played absolutely dynamite throughout this whole thing. I think he was pretty much one of the single-handed reasons why they were able to get past Cantorlogic Gaming in the long run. And then also adversely, speaking of Cantorlogic Gaming, 16-1 in the opening round to Cloud9, that's pretty rough. And that kind of shows you that Cantorlogic Gaming is kind of in this period of strife right now where they just haven't been able to really perform up to their skill level. And, you know, as much as I talk about Nothing having a great series with Cloud9, I think adversely, one of the players that kind of surprised a lot of people from Cantorlogic Gaming through this tournament was actually Fugly. He's not necessarily known as like this huge fragger that puts up big numbers and everything like that, but he was very solid throughout this tournament, and it was really nice to see him starting to step up if it wasn't for the fact that the rest of CLG kind of floundered throughout the group stages.
And you talk about Cantorlogic Gaming, Corey, you've mentioned their strife a little bit there. Yeah. This is a team, yeah, as you alluded to, haven't looked great in recent months. I think it was James Bardolph said, I might be wrong, who said this week that they make too many unforced errors. Is that a fair assessment of CLG, do you think?
No, absolutely. James knows exactly what he's talking about. One of the biggest things that's plagued them is their over-peakiness and their wanting to chase frags. It's just like a lack of discipline, especially when it comes down to the late game and some of their terrorist side rounds, that you'll see some of these rounds where they'll lose these 2-on-3s, 2-on-4s, where they've got, a post plant, they're in a good position and everything like that, and then a couple of their players will just unnecessarily peak to try to get a frag and try to close out the round. And that's one of the things is like until they stop these unforced errors, they're going to continue to struggle on the terrorist side of the map.
Absolutely. Okay, well, let's jump over to Group B. So, actually, very quickly, the two teams to advance from Group A were Luminosity and Cloud9. And as we take a look at Group B, this was Tempo Storm, NRG, Liquid, and Team Selfless. Now, top of this group was Tempo Storm. They kind of swept through, saw off NRG 16-5, and then Team Liquid 16-10 in the upper final. On the other side of the coin, NRG kind of bombed out. They lost to Tempo 5-16 and then got knocked out by Selfless 2-1. Is that kind of what you would expect? Tempo Storm at the top, NRG at the bottom of this group, Corey?
Yeah, I don't think that was really outside of the realm of possibility. A lot of people might have thought Liquid would have been able to take the top part out of this group, especially over top of Tempo Storm, given that Liquid, come into this, they've been playing relatively well recently, going back from the major, even though they, it's not necessarily the same lineup that they had there with Simple departing the team and everything like that, but it's still a very strong team, one of the top teams in North American CS, as you can see. I mean, they still made it through the groups relatively easily over top of Selfless there in the BO3 decider. Tempo Storm, though, I mean, what can you say? I think it was actually at the end of the first day for this DreamHack Austin tournament that 9 out of the top 10 rated players from day one were Brazilian. Yeah. Which is absolutely insane. I mean, I think the only person I think that wasn't in the top 10 might have been Showtime from Tempo Storm, but aside from him, every single other player was up there. I think the only non-Brazilian was Shroud.
Yeah.
That was in the top 10. So that just goes to show you what a dominant performance through the group stages both of the Brazilian teams had. I mean, Luminosity, like I said, they lost 8 rounds total in their two matches that they played. Tempo Storm, they lost 15 rounds total. So even combined, they still didn't even lose a total of a map in round count. So very dominating performance from the Brazilians through the groups. And I mean, you can ask anybody who follows my social media or anything like that, they know that my favorite teams to watch right now are both Luminosity and Tempo Storm. Just Brazilian CS, for some reason, it's just so damn exciting to watch.
Absolutely. Well, one North American success story, I guess, well, success in air quotes, I guess, was Team Selfless. Because last weekend they were in the CEVO LAN finals and it didn't go great for them. I don't think they won a single map. So this LAN here in Austin represented not only their first map win on LAN as a team, but also their first match. They beat NRG as a team on LAN for the first time. How much room do these guys have to grow, do you think, as a roster?
Oh, they have a ton of room to grow. I mean, with Uber, Relics, and Mainline on that squad, they've been, those three have been together for a reasonable amount of time. Bringing in Mitch, bringing in Nifty, like those two guys, they're relatively new to the scene. I know Nifty just came over not too terribly long. I believe he was a COD player prior to coming over to Counter-Strike, and he was like, all right, I want to give my try at this Counter-Strike stuff. Comes in, is this ridiculously unknown talent that comes into the CS scene, and he starts doing extremely well, gets picked up by Selfless. They pick up Mitch as well. And it's just they've really started to put things together. 16-10 loss to Liquid. That's not a bad loss. They didn't get blown out of the water. And then being able to win over Energy in a 2-1 fashion, even though they did end up losing 2-0 to Liquid in the decider matchup, that's still a good victory. And Energy, they're not a bad team. And especially, I mean, if you look at the stats, and we're going to bring up stats a lot as we talk about this stuff. Yeah. One of the most impressive things to actually see from Energy was the fact that GOB had a hell of a tournament. For a guy that, is the in-game leader, usually in-game leaders, you're not necessarily dependent on to put up big numbers or anything like that. But throughout this tournament, he played absolutely insane. He was phenomenal throughout this tournament.
Just before we wrap up this topic, let's take a look at the bracket stage. So this was Tempo Storm versus Cloud9, Liquid versus Luminosity, and then in the grand final, Tempo versus Luminosity. And Corey, I guess once the two Brazilian teams got together in the final, which a lot of people saw coming, perhaps, again, no surprise that Luminosity took the title here in Austin.
Yeah, no, not really much of a surprise there. I mean, I know that I was pretty hyped when I saw that Tempo Storm and Luminosity both went through the group stages at the #1 seed, and that they weren't going to have to actually play each other when it came to the beginning of the bracket stage, because that was going to allow for that possibility for that all Brazilian final. And I was craving that. I wanted that all Brazilian final, especially with the way that they played on day one. I really wanted to see that, no offense to the North American scene, because, you did have some representation here. Cloud9 took a map off of Tempo Storm. I believe they actually won the first map of the series, and that put Tempo Storm on the back foot. They had to fight, scratch, and claw and get their way back into this, and they were able to bring back the series, win it 2-1, and then Luminosity kind of manhandled Liquid a little bit there and got into the grand finals. In the grand finals, it was 2 16-9s on both of the maps, so it's not horrible losses. They weren't blowouts by any stretch of the imagination, but that was pretty much, I mean, Luminosity were easily the favorites going into this tournament. I don't think there's any room for debate on that whatsoever. But Tempo Storm, they just recently won the ESL Pro League tournament.
Yeah,
they come into here. They had a hot hand. They did relatively well at Malmö. It wasn't the best placing for them, but they were still able to do a little bit of damage in that tournament. Then they come into the CEVO land. They end up winning that. They had a best of 5 series that they won over Virtus Pro, albeit a struggling Virtus Pro, but still, that's one of the, I mean, you never have a free win on a team like Virtus Pro, and they brought it in. They were able to close out the series, get to the grand finals, end up winning the grand finals. So kudos to them. They're looking really good right now. And again, this was all part of that streak that I told you Luminosity was on, where they had won like 15 games in a row. So pretty expected result.
Our second story this week is the ESL Pro League finals, which are taking place this weekend. Well, actually right now, and including the weekend, just down the road in London, England. Now, Corey, this is a pretty big tournament, somewhere in the region of $500,000 of prize money, 200K going to the first place finisher here this weekend. So, as we have a look at Group A, this was the group with Astralis, Optic, G2, and Luminosity. And just a caveat to everybody watching at home, the issue here is we're recording PopFlash on Wednesday evening, so a lot of matches have been played today. We can't talk about the matches taking place right now on Thursday, because obviously they haven't happened for us. We're living in the past. But we can talk about today's results. So, Corey, in our first group, we've got Astralis up at the top. They haven't been looking too hot, I think it's fair to say, of Astralis. They lost to Optic earlier today, which I didn't think I would ever have to say. And they're currently, as we speak, fighting Luminosity to stay in the tournament. There's a danger they may get knocked out. What do these guys need to do to get back on form?
Stop choking, I guess, would be the biggest thing. I mean, the most blunt way to put it. I mean, that matchup they played. Now, granted, it was a BO1, so people are going to argue, if it was a BO3, Astralis would have never lost to a team like Optic Gaming.
Yeah.
But they played on Inferno. Astralis started on the CT side, and Optic still beat them 16-7 with Astralis winning the CT side pistol. That is no easy task. Optic, I think they won Terror's side like 9-6 and then only gave up 1 round when they went over to the CT side, which was a stark contrast to some of the performances that we've seen from Optic in the past, especially as far as LAN is concerned. With their most recent performance, I believe it was actually at SEVO when they first had their LAN debut of Mixwell in the lineup, where they did not look very good. However, in this matchup, Mixwell was a beast. But as much of a beast as Mixo was, Nafly was an even bigger beast, which is like, I mean, and Nafly is like my unsung hero for Optic. He's the one guy that like, he can turn matches himself. And that's kind of what he did here. I mean, he just took control. He was getting entries all over the place. Mixwell was getting some serious impact kills. And they ended up routing Astralis 16-7 in the opener for ESL Pro League. But then, on the other side of the bracket, we've also got G2 and Luminosity. And since Astralis lost to Optic Gaming and they're playing against Luminosity, you can kind of see how this segue is going. G2 beat Luminosity to start off the round, which was a nice victory for them. Definitely bodes well for them going through. They actually also beat Optic Gaming, so they're actually the upper or the first seed to come out of Group A, which is very impressive in its own right. Optic Gaming is going to be down there to play against whoever wins between Luminosity and Astralis. Optic is going to have to play one of those two. So they've still got an opportunity to move on out of this group. But G2 is actually going out in the #1 seed, which is really impressive from those guys because lately they really haven't had that all-star performance that we've kind of expected from people like Shocks, RPK, Smiths, Scream, and now their new guy Body that's on that team. So really good to see them coming out in the top seed of the group.
Absolutely. Okay, let's leave Group A there. We'll jump down to Group B. And as we get the graphic up on screen, this was the group with NiP, Liquid, Cloud9, and Fnatic. So, 2 Swedes, 2 Americans mixed in here. Pretty rough group for the Americans, I think it's fair to say. Liquid and Cloud9. Yeah, that pretty much sums it up, right?
Let's start with Fnatic and Cloud9 so we can delve a little bit more in depth into the NiP Liquid matchup.
Okay, well, what are your thoughts? I mean, we now know, of course, that Fnatic did beat Cloud9. Your thoughts on that game?
Well, it was 16-10, right, the scoreline. So it wasn't a blowout. Cloud9, again, it's a relatively new roster with Slimmy coming in. Stewie 2K's still not that experienced as far as the LAN scene is concerned. And you've got Fnatic over there. Granted, they are playing with a stand-in, but you've still got JW, Dennis, Flusha, Crims. I mean, these guys can put up monster numbers regardless of Olaf Meister being on or off. Each one of them can step up and take over a match. And again, it's just one of those things where it's like, I mean, Fnatic, they might have been on a little bit of a slide lately, but it's still Fnatic. So, I mean, this was, as far as I'm concerned, I mean, you've got pretty much the top 2 North American, like actual North American teams in this group with Liquid and Cloud9, and playing against the team that is essentially the #1 team in the world, albeit with their lack of performance lately. They've kind of slipped a little bit, but they're still one of the top 3 teams in the world. Cloud9, huge ask for them. 16-10, not a bad loss. They have an opportunity to bounce back from that, but obviously Fnatic, the experience, the veteranship, they're going to move on.
Yeah, of course. And Fnatic did beat Cloud9, as you alluded to, 16-10. I know now, on the other side of the bracket, this game is a little bit more controversial. Ninjas in Pyjamas versus Team Liquid. Mainly because Liquid, and, I hate to remind...
It hurts my heart, man. It hurts my heart.
I hate to remind my American co-host that... Liquid have been in bad form recently. Of course, they got knocked out of the major to Luminosity, threw 2 massive leads away, and once again here today at the Pro League finals, or here on Wednesday I should say, they had a 13-2 lead over Ninjas in Pyjamas. It may even have been 14-2. I think they won the pistol round.
14-2.
The pistol round of the next half, and NiP still came back to win in double OT. This, well, exactly. This is a facepalm, right, Corey?
Yeah, I mean it's. I mean, what do you say? I mean, when they went to the major, they played against Luminosity in the quarterfinal.
Yeah.
Or the semifinal or whatever. Well, I think it was the semifinal.
Yeah.
And 15 match points was the total that they ended up losing. They were up on Mirage something like 15-7. Let this comeback happen. Luminosity beats them. They were up with a tremendous lead going into, I believe it was Cash and map number 2, and Luminosity brings it back and ends up beating them. They're up 14-2 against NiP. 14-2. Match is like within grasp. They win the CT or the terrorist side pistol on Dust 2, I think it was, to go up to 14-2. And then NiP just makes this comeback. And they continue to come back. And continue to come back. And Liquid just cannot close out this match. It goes into overtime. Liquid, I believe, actually in the first overtime, Liquid went up 18-15 and had match point, 3 possible match points in single overtime. NiP brought it back, forced double overtime, and then NiP just swept them. So, I mean, just salt in the wounds, man. These guys, they just can't catch a break when it comes to that kind of thing. They need to figure out how to close out these matches. But that also shows the resilience and the tenacity of this NiP lineup. And that's the big thing as well, is like, I'm not going to be the first one to say this, but I also feel very confident in being able to say this, that this might actually be the resurgence of NiP. They have been very hot lately. They won DreamHack Malmö. They come in here, I mean, granted, they were playing against Liquid. They have a weak showing at the beginning of this match, but they end up persevering, pulling it out. And then they go on into their next matchup, which is the winners upper finals against Fnatic. And they beat them down 16-9 on Train. So NiP Magic could be feeling it again. With the leadership of Threat, you've definitely seen a turnaround in this roster. And it's been a big-time turnaround for the better. And I love what I'm seeing out of NiP lately.
That's it for this week. I'm Jack Westerman, joined by Corey Megaman Gilbert.
And we'll be back next Wednesday with another episode of PopFlash.